Well, my name is Kathy East, and I'm the past president. That just means I've been past president for 2 years of the USBBY board, and I'm really pleased to be part of this conference and happy to have this little moment to introduce this afternoon's program, the fourth general session. This is a conversation about translation. I think this is a little unsung hero part that we forget to remember, that these books that come from other countries don't necessarily come in English, and how do they get that way? So we are looking forward to the insight in having this happen. Our panel today consists of Aja, who is from China. He is a leading advocate for reading programs across China and also a writer, translator, and co-owner of an independent children's bookstore, Hip Hip Hooray. He lives with his wife and daughter and their dog in Beijing. So I think you can tell which one is Aja. Laura Watkinson. Laura translates from the Dutch. I think in your program it says Danish, but it's really Dutch. Translates from, well, what we might not know, but from Dutch, German, and Italian, and has a particular interest in children's books and comics. And she says she lives in a tall, thin house on a canal in Amsterdam. They're all tall and thin in Amsterdam. And you ride a bike, too, and text while you're riding your bike?
I'm not that Dutch.
Well, confession is good for the soul. Maya Fay Latham lives between Barcelona and Brooklyn and translates from Spanish and Catalan. She has loved children's books since she was a child and even has a Dr. Seuss tattoo. She's not saying where. And our moderator for this session is Claudia Bedrick, and she is the publisher for Enchanted Lion Books, and she also has worked as a translator from the French. So let us welcome our moderator and our panel. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It's an honor to be here. I know we're all fans of IBI and really love USBBY and the great people on it. So thank you for all the tremendous work you do. Since we're starting a little late, I have a few comments to contextualize what we're talking about today, and I'll try to talk quickly so that we have enough time for this fascinating conversation. In an On Being interview with Krista Tippett, Mary Catherine Bateson reminds us that we shouldn't deny death because it is what helps us to see ourselves in proportion, as small and temporary despite our hubris, greed, and competitiveness. It reminds us that we don't understand as much as we need to, and by putting our finitude before us, it helps us to better see the present moment, which for us today is a moment of urgency. She goes on to say, and I quote, "One way of saying it is that we have to learn to use the word we to include all of life on earth. We have to learn to experience that as a terrible and tender beauty and to shape everything we do to protect it. That we must learn to use this we in a collective, universal way is an astonishingly beautiful sentiment, and as I've considered it, I've been pondering whether translation isn't one of the very best paths we have for arriving at an understanding, and arriving there not simply intellectually, but compassionately through experience. Because when we truly live within the pages of a book, we don't merely gain an understanding, insight, and knowledge. Rather, we have emotional, out-of-body experiences, transformative experiences that completely change us and how we relate to the world around us. Works in translation, the translator Edith Grossman tells us, expand our ability to explore the thoughts and feelings of people from another society or another time. They permit us to savor the transformation of the foreign into the familiar, and for a brief time to live outside of our own skins, our own preconceptions and misconceptions. They expand and deepen our world, our consciousness, in countless indescribable ways. With this in mind, it seems valid to ask what possibilities for discovery, transformation, and truer understanding we might be denying ourselves and our children as a culture by ignoring so much of the world's literature, and how it can be that in such urgent times as our own, with war as a perpetual state, refugees and immigrants desperately on the move, and poverty and hunger all around us, that we are not trying to deepen our relationship to the we that includes all of life on earth by publishing and advocating for more books and more truly foreign books, and for the stories that are not yet being told from cultures other than our own. For today, as we know so well, we need each other's many stories more than ever. Constricted to our own language and culture, we become constricted within ourselves, cut off from the manifold possibilities for thinking and doing and becoming that would allow us to better understand human beings and their lives across the world. Translated works are one of the few things we have that give us the entire world, with the terrible and tender beauty of the we, that collective we, that we must strive to feel kinship with and protect. And so today we are going to explore what translators actually do and why it's vitally important for their work to be better understood and given more recognition by all of us, though perhaps most especially by publishers who need to publish more books from other countries and to acknowledge that they are translations, and by reviewers who still often fail to truly take on what is at stake when reviewing a book in translation, and what it might mean to do justice to the work of the translator as an author and storyteller in his or her own right. So with all of those things in mind as a kind of landscape against which we're talking, we're now going to open the conversation with the question, what is the role of the translator, and why might it be important for people to better understand what translators do? Laura, do you want to start?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thanks very much to USBBY for remembering to remember about translators. It's wonderful to have the four of us sitting here and to be having this conversation and interaction with you. I'd also like to thank Claudia and Anita Edmonds, who I think is here somewhere in the room. And thank you to the Dutch Foundation for Literature for all of their help over the years and for helping to bring me over here. Now, that's probably a good jump-off point for what's the role of the translator. I'm very lucky in that I translate from Dutch, also German and Italian, not Danish. But the Dutch Foundation is very helpful with support for translators. They understand the process, they support in terms of samples, translations that we present to publishers. They help us to bring Dutch stories into other languages, and it's not just translation into English, it's translation into many other languages. They're very helpful with the book fairs. They take along authors, they take along translators, they introduce their culture. And it means that as a translator, I have some support there. I have people there who will help me to get my message across, and they'll help me to put me in touch with publishers and for publishers to get in touch with translators. I think that first and foremost, the role of the translator is to mediate between two cultures, to take the culture, the source culture, and to read the book, to really understand the story, and then to try to present your own understanding of that story to your other culture and to bridge that gap there. Maybe somebody else had something that they'd like to add.
I guess the short answer is a translator is someone who's rewriting a book from a foreign language into their own language. I think of it as a two-part process that's sometimes contradictory and has to eventually become complementary in order to be successful, which is sort of the very close-up kind of deconstructionist part where you're going word by word and using the dictionary a lot and, you know, kind of investigating almost like an archaeologist. And like an archaeologist, it's all taken out of context. It's literally word by word, and then you have to pull back and get the bigger picture. And so play with that. Find the middle ground that works.
I think the really important word that you said there was rewriting, because translation is writing as well. I think there's a sort of impression that it's one language in, another language out, and there's not very much goes on in the middle. But we spend an awfully long time thinking about the best way to put the story across and try to achieve the same sort of effect as the original writer. So yeah, it's rewriting.
And you do all those little compensations too. If there's some great wordplay that it's impossible to get across at that point, then you put it in, do something similar in a different place, and try to. You want to say some more?
At first, I thanks St. Laura and thanks to everybody here, and I come here especially by a book, Dear Genius. Dear Genius, Nostrum. I mainly translated a picture book for Chinese children, but from 2008 we find a book, Dear Genius. So we want to know how to make so many beautiful children's book. So we want to share this book for all the Chinese editors, librarians, and teachers. So we try to find the copyright and translated this book. And when we translated this book, we sometimes made like word by word or dictionary, but translated something like Dear Genius. We must know what the book really told about. We must know who is the letter the right to, and what they do, what the books they mention. So we have a group, 7 people and 7 person, and we spend 3 years to do some research. You see this? To my opinion, translation is like my base conception is like a dialogue. Dialogue. We must do dialogue with the original writer.
And with the original culture.
The first day I came to New York, I think I know some English. I went down to the subway and want to buy the tickets, and I read word by word, and I confused. I don't know why. Then I stand beside, and you first. And I study, I research, keep researching, but I don't know how to do that. At that moment, I think I need a translator. Not only translate the word by word to me, but translate the situation for me. And I think the dialogue is the dialogue with the original author and dialogue with the future reader. And when we translate the children's book, we must dialogue with our childhoods, our image of children, and then made it conversion. And I think translation is that kind of art. I think it's art.
Beautiful. There's a lot to think about there. So that leads really nicely into our next question, which is, do you agree with the idea that loyalty to the reader of a translated work is also loyalty to the author? And if so, what does this mean to you? And if not, how would you phrase it to get closer to what that relationship is?
Okay, coming back to the idea of the translator as writer, perhaps it helps there's a useful distinction between an author and a writer in this context, I think. I'm not the author of the stories that I translate. I didn't come up with the plot, I didn't come up with the characters, I didn't have to think about the story arc, that's all there for me. But I am the writer, I write all of the words in that book. So I'm writing with the reader in mind, and I think, yes, I have loyalty, absolutely, to the original author of the story. I want to ensure that that story has the same effect on the reader in English as it would have done on the original reader in the original language. So my loyalty lies there. My loyalty first and foremost is to the reader. I want to make sure that the reader gets a really good story. And that also reflects in loyalty to the author. I think sometimes authors who are a little bit, perhaps they're being translated for the first time and they don't really understand the process, they can get a little bit defensive about their work. I've had some wonderful, wonderful working relationships with authors who are very keen to answer questions when I have them. They don't interfere, they respect what I'm doing. Sometimes it can get a little bit tricky. I was having a talk to an author who I wasn't translating, and we were talking about character names, and I said, well, yeah, sometimes you do have to change the names of the characters in the story, just because, particularly with children's books, just because they're unpronounceable, or they sound a little bit funny. For example, the Dutch name Frederik can be shortened to Freek, which is spelt F-R-E-E-K. It reads as freak. So, you've got to think about these things. There's another book that I translated recently. It's got a knight in it called Fatumar. So, yeah, this wasn't going to work. There was all this stuff about Fatumar going around blowing his horn, pop, pop. So, yeah, I had to change him to Fantomar, so he's Sir Fantomar now. But this author I was talking to, she was like, what? I spend ages deciding on the names of these characters, and you go and you change them. And, these are the dialogues that you have to have with people sometimes. Particularly with children, you've got that loyalty to them. You need to get that story across to them in the same way as the author would have done with the original book. So those are my thoughts.
Haven't you also had the opposite experience where the author's kind of like, oh, put whatever you want?
Yeah, that's
And it's like, no, that doesn't really help me,
you're not being helpful.
or they say, I don't know, that just came out when I was writing it. Well, that is a somewhat helpful answer because you...
Yeah, that means that you
But-
can do your rewriting. You can go, okay, I'm free here to decide what we're going to do.
Well, there's things that are important in, that are cultural things that are important in one language that aren't so important in another. If you're translating into German and it's like, is this a night nurse that works in the hospital or one that's, they have a very specific word for different things that, I was speaking with a Peruvian author recently who was saying, whatever, it's, she just appears once, it doesn't matter, but, well, we have to make that decision.
And if it really matters, then you might explain it just in a little clause. You'll put something in there to say what it is, but quite often you'll just sort of brush over it.
Sometimes it's a very difficult choice, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. The original also think a very, very beautiful name. I think I translate the Knuffle Bunny by Mo Williams. Yeah. But Knuffle read in Chinese, not sound good. You see, we must
Sounds great in
change.
Dutch.
Yeah. So we must change the name. So I changed the name. Something is pronounced like Gunash. Gunash in Chinese is okay, but in English I think not good. Okay, maybe Knuffle. So we Chinese sometimes say. Translation is something like murder. Murder. Sometimes you must have the choice. Very difficult, but you must choice. Yeah.
What are the words like in Dutch or in Catalan or Spanish or other words in Chinese are there for translation? Like murder. I mean, what would
Well, there's the famous, you can pronounce it better than me, traduttore, traditore, no? The translator as traitor.
Yeah.
Traitor.
That comes from the Italian. And
And the one about beautiful ones not being faithful and faithful ones not being beautiful, like women. We'll move on from that one. Yes.
Well, I would say that there's not only a loyalty to the reader, but there's a loyalty to the text that I see as different from a loyalty to the author. I've had the experience of translating my husband, and he's also a translator from the opposite languages. And so he had some things to say about some of my choices. And in the end, I had an interesting realization that it was my translation, that the author is there and, can have suggestions and can be incredibly helpful. And at the same time, the translation is mine, and the choices, the nuances are mine.
And you're making those choices while trying to be faithful to the text.
Of course.
Its
To the
atmosphere
spirit rather
and the
than the
tone,
letter,
right, to
yeah.
the spirit of it.
My original, my first draft, I stay quite close. I think that's the easiest way to get their style to come across. And then I adapt it in the ways that I deem necessary. But I feel like, staying close to their words really helps me to capture
To get the
their the cadence, and which of course changes from language to language, but you have to start with a real loyalty to the text.
Yeah.
I think more than the author.
Translating
yeah.
into, oh, sorry, Ajin.
Yeah, I can give some example.
That would be great.
Once I translated a book named Stone Soup by John Moose. Yeah, John Moose. Yeah. It's a Chinese story. Three monks go to a village and then make a stone soup. And I changed some words from the original text. For example, the foods. And at the end of the story, they ate something like lychee nut. But I think because this story is set in the North China and ancient China, lychee nut is not popular at that time. You see, nowadays we can transport very convenient, but in old days, though I think they can impossible to use the lychee nuts. So I changed to longan. I think that is maybe the good. And some of the names of something like scholar, and I changed some word Asian names. I think if John Moose can speak in Chinese, maybe he would, yes, he would accept it. Yes, you can use that. So I think the loyalty is assume that. This is my principle. Assume that the original author can speak the Turkish language, and he want to make the children clearly not confused. Yeah. So I think loyalty is just something like that.
So when you're translating, Ajia, are you hearing the author in your ears speaking Chinese, like how they might say it?
Yes, that means I must do many research. I want to know who is the writer, and to try to know more as possible as I could to know more about the writer. Yeah, and I stress on what he or she really want to tell. And not just the words. Yes, I can make the efficient the same results. Yes, I think it's just like
By trying to really hear their voice.
Yeah, we're the closest readers that any author will ever get.
Yeah, sometimes I found the email of the writer. I can write to the author and ask the opinion.
Yeah.
Can I change some words? Yes. Yeah.
Well, I I've had the experience, as I said, my husband is also a translator, and he translates from the English into Spanish. And I've had the experience of reading a novel, and then he's later translating it, and he asks me a question, and I don't know the answer. You know, when you're reading, you're just reading. You don't know everything about the 16th century sailing vessel that it's taking place on. You're just reading. But when you're translating, you have to solve all those little problems and then weave them together in a way that sounds good.
It's like
So-
another level of editing, really. We're like editors as well.
So you're storytellers, authors, editors, and researchers, and carriers of the author's voice.
Cultural mediators.
Yeah, cultural mediators.
We don't get paid enough.
Yeah, not nearly enough.
Yes.
I think when we're talking about the role of translators and sort of dispelling myths, I'd like to talk about this kind of ivory tower idea that I find very problematic, particularly in the States. I learned my craft or art or trade, whatever you would like to call it, probably all three, in Europe. In Spain, in a country where 30% of the literature is translated, as opposed to here where it's not quite 3%, and where translators work in very different conditions, but it's certainly acknowledged that one can be a professional translator, whereas here I've been called a mercenary translator for making a living, and I prefer to call it a working class translator. And what that means is I need to meet my deadlines and I need to be paid, and I'm not. I can't spend a year translating a sonnet, and I need to solve problems in a timely fashion, and I need to be paid accordingly. It's not. I mean, there is an aspect to which it's a labor of love, and it's a great career. I do recommend it because you're always learning, and that's you can't say that about so many careers. But it's really a craft. You're 10 years in, you're going faster, you're better. It's something learned. It's not alchemy.
Now, do you get paid more 10 years in? Can you advocate for yourself on the basis
No,
of
and-
experience? No.
In fact, I work comes to me more. I can say that.
Yeah, that's true.
And I'm, like Laura, I'm lucky to translate from a minority language, Catalan, which is well funded. And they're very interested in having their work be available in English. And the authors are very grateful and, don't mind a few emails from me at a certain part in the process. But no, I mean, in fact, translators in Spain, their rates have been lowered across the board. Even, large international groups just send out an email because that's what's happening in Southern Europe, basically. But
And there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding of what translators do in our work and how involved it is, how much time it takes, how much thinking.
And as a mother, raising my kids in Europe, I read a lot of American books that are translated into Catalan, and I see some that really succeed, and I see others that fail, and I think a lot of those failures is based on that our work is often, you're asked to give an estimate, and it's usually based on a word count. Children's books have special, you're not only working with the text, but you're working with the illustrations. And if someone is having to work, there's 50 words in this book, you get paid, $5. Okay.
But it's a real craft, translating picture books.
So
Yeah.
what would you say the differences are between translating for adults and translating for children?
You want to take that?
Oh, yeah, because I have no experience translated for adults.
Well, you translated Dear Genius.
I am Dear Genius, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But I think it's another children's book. Yeah. Yeah. I think the difference, just like the writing for adults and writing for children. When you writing for children or translated for children, you must have some image of the children and must have the image of your own childhood. And this morning we hear the illustrators said they're selfish. They do for their child inside. Yeah, I think it's the part of the truth, and we must have some children, but not exactly my daughter or my neighbor's son. No, but some image of the child. We, for example, when we translate a book for Miffy, for 2-year-old and 3-year-old Dodo, yeah, maybe. You must think, can she catch the meaning? Can she like the word? Can like the sound? Yeah, we must think about it. But it's not exactly the children, but the image. So you must find a way to know the children. So before I was a translator, I was a storyteller. I frequently to tell story to different ages of the children, and to stronger my image for children. I think writing for children or translating for children must have that good image. Yeah.
So would you say that's a metaphysical conception of the child with a sense of their spirituality, or their how the kind of human they are as different from what we become as adults?
Yeah. I think the children is a very different creature. I think. Yeah. When we have the children, when we grown up, most of us forget. But when we have children near you and with you daily, day and day, and you find something that really different from adults. So I think it's just not concept or image. Yeah.
That guide your work and
your guide
translation.
My work. Yeah.
Could you also just comment on the value placed on translation in China, as Mara and Laura were talking about? Is it? I'm sure it's not lucrative, but is there a perception of it as skilled and valuable, or what is the perception in China of translation?
In China, the situation, the translator, in China, our we rely on translated books. Yeah, rely. For example, for the picture books, maybe in the titles, maybe 50% of the titles are translated from English or from another languages. So translation is very important in China. And although the payment's not good, but working class translator, but it's very, very important in China. Yeah.
And you have books coming from all over the world, or would it be largely from British and America, all over the world?
All over the world, from North Europe, from Japan, from some from South America, not just from English world,
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great wealth.
Yeah.
It's a great wealth.
And do you find that in Spain as well?
In Spain, the Anglophone world is quite dominant. And then in children's books, there's a fair amount of French ones too, and some Italian. I mean, Geronimo Stilton.
Yep.
And they actually, people my age in Spain, I've noticed when we get nostalgic and have had a few beers, they saw a lot more Japanese, mostly on the television, but of course then it comes down into books too with the manga and the anime, where growing up in America, there was kind of a monopoly with American cartoons because we produced so many, we didn't think we needed any, and so there's a lot more.
I mean, that's changed now. I mean, my son who's
now.
a teen is like grown up with lots of manga and is devoted to it. I mean, he doesn't read. He reads some graphic novels, but he really reads like a ton of manga. So I think that's changed.
It's
when
it's
we
changed
were growing
somewhat,
up,
but there's
yeah.
still more of a Japanese influence with Shin-chan and who I don't think is popular here because of the nudity and he acts too much like a real kid. He runs around flashing his penis at people. But in general, as with books for adults, English is pretty dominant, and then Europe.
But I think that's part of our role as translators as well, to draw people's attention to these great books, to these great stories that just aren't getting heard in English. If you picture a highway, you've got going in one direction, you've juggernauts like Harry Potter, and coming in the other direction, you've got a couple of little tentative rabbits and somebody on a squeaky scooter. It's up to us to try and push more books or pull more books in our direction. Make sure that those great books from other cultures do get translated. There's a book that I've just translated by Tonke Dracht, The Letter for the King. And it is the most fantastic book. It was written in 1962. A few years back, it was voted the best Dutch children's book ever. It's been translated into languages all over the world. It's been made into a film. It's been made into a TV series in Germany and in the Netherlands. It had never been translated. Alan Garner, Tonke Dracht, the author of this book, she illustrated one of his books. He fell in love with this book, tried to get it published. Alan Garner couldn't get it published in English. And finally, Adam Freudenheim from Pushkin Press decided, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to try and publish this book. And now it's been released by David Fickling, which is as his imprint for Scholastic. It's been released in the US as well. So finally, it was written originally in 1962. It's available in English as well, and I'm so pleased about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that was a great result. I'm really pleased that that's happened. So I'm doing my bit to get more traffic along that road.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were talking the other day about how maybe the possibility of just broadening and deepening the conversation between translators and publishers, and I'm now in a conversation with someone who translates from the Portuguese and another person who translates from the Italian, and these are people who are immersed in the literatures of those languages and can tell me so much and introduce me to so much, and I wouldn't know about the books that are out there and really amazing and unpublished here for the past 50, 60 years without them. And so I think, the process of translation can be really daunting for a publisher because we're not specialists in these languages and cultures and literatures, and it's hard to navigate. But if you reach out to translators, they know and they love these books, and they can make them come alive for us as publishers so we can begin to know where to go with them. And
it's great that you and people like Anita are so open to books in translation, and we're very grateful that those books are getting translated now.
No, but I mean, I think they could become a bigger conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we should point out that there's a definite pro of bringing books from another languages. They've already been edited. They've already been through that process. I mean, and you can often acquire them at a fairly reasonable price too. So I think maybe we should talk about those benefits for a publisher, which I think are very real.
But not only that, they've also been read by hundreds of thousands of readers. They've had reviews. it's been seen whether they're accepted, as good literature, good stories,
Road tested.
road tested.
I mean,
yeah.
it might even be polite for us as a culture to show more interest and care a bit more about
Yeah.
the books that are being published elsewhere.
Well, beyond just from a perfectly selfish, it's a cultural impoverishment to not. I mean, we've all been there. You talk to anyone from any other country, and they know so much more about our culture than we do about theirs. And we're sitting around looking at our navels. It's problematic. I mean, you see it in our foreign policy too. We're exporting wars. We're exporting culture. And we're impoverished by it.
But it's just straightforward, plain good stories that we're missing out on as well. The cultural aspect is hugely important, obviously, but there are a lot of great stories out there that have nothing to do with the culture of the country where they were written, but they're still great, great stories. Books like, for example, Soldier Bear, which I translated for Eerdmans a while back. That was written by a Dutch author, but it was about a group of Polish soldiers in the Second World War who had a bear as a mascot. Now, that's a story that's a universally good story, and it's great that it actually got into translation. Or Mr. Orange, which I translated for Claudia. That's a great book. Yeah, that was about a little boy in New York, in fact. Written by a Dutch author, but there's a Dutch connection because the artist Mondrian was one of the characters in it. So, yeah, it's great that you can now read that in English as well.
I think we want to try, if we're not running too late, to take some questions in a minute. But Aji, I know that you have so many great stories and so many great examples and so many books to share with us, and I think it would be really enriching and rewarding. So do you just want to share some of that with us?
I take a book from China with me, and the name is The Funny Little Woman. Can someone remember this? Yeah. Very interesting book. The Chinese version is translated by me. And when I translate this book, I find this very, very interesting. The writer is Anine Mosel, is a librarian, yes, here. But retold the original story, not from her. The writer is, the name very, very difficult to remember. The English name is Patrick Lafcadio Hearn. Yeah. But he was Greek, and he lived in Japan, and then turned to Japanese. And he has another Japanese name. The name is Koizumi Yakumo. I maybe pronounced like that. I can't remember. But in Chinese, he has another name. We call him Xiaoquan Bayun. This is very famous writer to give many Chinese writers strong influence. So I think Greek man maybe needs many different names, maybe, huh? And it's very interesting. It's the original story, not by the Lafcadio Hearn, but when he lived in Japan, he found a story and folk story and turned it into English. And Anine Mosel and retold in USA and made it into a picture book story. And finally, the book come to China. We made it into a Chinese version. Very interesting. And before translated this book, I do some research. It took me almost 3 months to find all the stories by Lafcadio Hearn. I want to know why he found this book story and what the story really told about. and I after 3 months, I think I got it, and I found that the clue is the love, the funny little woman in this book. Tee hee hee, tee hee hee hee, love, yeah. And thus the onion, maybe you say ghosts, they love also this way, in this way, tee hee hee hee, tee hee hee hee. What means tee hee hee hee? I think it's the very the key of the story. So it took me another weeks to find a way to make the love something from the ghosts scary, but really funny. You think, and it's a funny little woman's love and ghost love the same. How could we love that as that? Yeah. I think, and one night, and most people sleep. Yeah, I think I found it. Oh, I think maybe. Yeah. Like that. Scary. Yeah. Long. And my wife knocked my door. Yeah. What's up? Yeah. So I found the key of the story. I think it is very interesting. After that, after translated this book, I told the story to children. I teach them how to laugh like ghosts, the funny little woman. And once the 1,400 students in the school all learned how to I told them, don't laugh that way in midnight. The neighbor would call the police. Yes, I think. And thank you for your love. And you see, this book, the story travels across the culture, and translation make this travel possible. I think is what we done is to make this kind of travel beautiful and possible. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. Do we have any moments for questions or no?
You can take one or two, I think.
I was wondering, when it comes to onomatopoeia and alliteration and idioms, is that like, oh no, or is that exciting? Or are there some things that's it's all alliteration and we can't possibly translate it?
I had a recent kind of funny moment, and this happens to translators all the time. You solve something one way, and then months later you're thinking, oh, I have a better idea for that. But for Claudia, I translate volumes of collected comic strips that run in a daily paper in Buenos Aires. And the author, the cartoonist, the illustrator, uses a lot of onomatopoeia. And one of the things, which is kind of a common question as well, is like, is this a normal usage in the language, or is this something that I need to find a more original solution for? But one of the problems was that I realized in English, in comic strips, for some reason, snoring sounds like this zzz, which to me sounds like a bee. And it doesn't sound like a snore that I've ever heard. And it's this Z thing. So I thought, am I going to take on the world now and challenge this convention? And I don't even remember how I solved it. But I think I've come up with a better one for next time. So for the next volume.
One of the trickiest things is where you've got a pun or some sort of play on words that's actually related to pictures in a picture book as well. And then sometimes you just have to actually look at the pictures and rewrite and just use something else if that pun doesn't work, if you can't translate it in some sort of version that's close to the language and to the picture. Yeah, so you'll have to sort of juggle and play around with it that way. Sometimes if you get like a very short poem and it's based on wordplay, you just know that really isn't going to work, or it's going to be a labour of love. You know, I think everybody's got a few little pet projects that they keep in the bottom drawer and they come back to. Can I do it now? No, still not. But yeah, there's generally some kind of solution that you can come up with. If you can't do it straight away, yeah, you compensate, you do it somewhere else later in the text.
I translated a series of rhyming books that were kind of these little little poems for kids, and at certain points it was obvious that the illustrator had compensated for a very far-fetched rhyme by including it in the illustration. So there's a cat vacuuming, or just that. Because it rhymes in the original, then to make it work better in the original, the illustrator had, so those are tricky moments.
Yeah, I think it is the most difficult part of translation, but it's most interesting thing. Yes. Yeah. When you solve the problem, you very, very happy. Yeah.
I think we could go on talking for hours, but we can't. So thank you so much. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.